Robert had always been a practical man. For 37 years, he'd worked at the manufacturing plant on the edge of town, raised 3 children with his wife, Helen, and lived by a simple code: family first, honesty always, and love without conditions. Now at 62, with silver threading through his dark hair and reading glasses perched on his nose more often than not, he thought he'd seen everything life had to offer, but nothing had quite prepared him for the evening when his youngest daughter Sarah called to say she was coming home for the weekend. There was something in her voice, a tremor of nervousness that only a father could detect after 28 years of knowing every inflection, every pause, every unspoken word. Sarah arrived on Friday evening, just as the autumn sun was painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Robert watched from the living room window as she pulled into the driveway, taking longer than usual to gather her things from the car. Helen squeezed his hand gently, that knowing touch that came from 40 years of marriage, the kind of communication that needed no words. Dinner was pot roast, Sarah's favorite since childhood. They talked about her job at the marketing firm in the city, about her apartment with the view of the park, about everything and nothing at all. Robert noticed how Sarah pushed her food around her plate, how her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, the way it used to when she was small and the world was simple and full of wonder. After, Helen excused herself to take a phone call from Sarah's older sister Patricia. The silence settled between father and daughter like a living thing. Robert set down his fork and looked at his little girl, who wasn't so little anymore but would always be his baby. The one who used to climb into his lap after a bad dream. The one who believed he could fix anything. "Sweetheart," he said gently, his voice carrying the weight of all those years of love and protection. "What is it you need to tell me?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment Robert's heart clenched with fear. Was she sick? Was she in trouble? 1,000 worries flooded through him in the space of a heartbeat. "Dad," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I've been wanting to tell you something for so long. I've been so afraid, but I can't keep living like this, keeping this part of myself hidden from you and Mom." Robert reached across the table and took her hand, the way he'd done when she was 5 and scared of the thunder, when she was 16 and her first boyfriend had broken her heart, when she was 22 and nervous about her first real job interview. "You can tell me anything," he said simply. "You know that." The words came then, tumbling out between tears and nervous laughter. Sarah told him about Emily, the woman she'd been seeing for the past year. She told him about the fear she'd carried since she was a teenager, knowing she was different but not knowing how to say it. She told him about the nights she'd lain awake, rehearsing this conversation, terrified that it would change everything between them. Robert listened without interrupting, his hand never leaving hers. When she finished, when the words had all been said and she sat there looking vulnerable and brave, and so very much like the little girl who used to hold his hand crossing the street, he was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up, walked around the table, and pulled his daughter into his arms the way he'd done 1,000 times before. He held her while she cried, those tears of release that come when a burden you've carried for too long finally lifts. "Sarah," he said softly, his own voice thick with emotion, "do you love her? Does she make you happy? Does she treat you with kindness and respect?" Sarah nodded against his shoulder. "Yes, Dad, she does. She's wonderful." Robert pulled back slightly, looking into his daughter's eyes with all the love a father could hold. "Then that's all that matters to me. Your happiness, sweetheart. That's all I've ever wanted for you. That's all any parent should want for their child. You're not disappointed?" Sarah asked, her voice small and uncertain. Robert smiled, that gentle smile that had soothed scraped knees and hurt feelings for nearly 3 decades. "Disappointed? Sarah, I'm proud of you. I'm proud that you had the courage to be honest with yourself and with us. and proud that you've found someone who makes you happy. That takes strength, the kind of strength I always knew you had. The weekend unfolded with a tenderness that Sarah had hoped for but hadn't quite believed possible. Helen embraced the news with the same unconditional love, immediately wanting to know everything about Emily. When would they meet her? Did she like pot roast? What did she do for work? The questions came with genuine interest and maternal warmth. On Sunday morning, as Sarah prepared to drive back to the city, Robert walked her to her car. The autumn air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. "Dad," Sarah said, loading her weekend bag into the trunk. "Thank you for being so understanding. I was so scared." Robert put his hands in his pockets, that familiar gesture Sarah had seen a million times. "You know," he said, looking out at the maple tree they'd planted together when she was 7. "When you kids were little, I used to worry about everything. I worried about whether I was being a good enough father, whether I was teaching you the right things, whether I was preparing you for the world out there." He turned to look at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "But somewhere along the way, I realized that the only thing that really matters, the only thing I needed to teach you, was how to love and be loved. And you figured that out, Sarah. You found someone to share your life with, someone who sees you for who you truly are. That's more than some people find in a lifetime." Sarah hugged her father tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of his aftershave and laundry detergent, the smell of home and safety and unconditional acceptance. "I love you, Dad," she whispered. "I love you too, sweetheart," he replied. "Always have, always will. Nothing could ever change that, nothing." As Robert watched his daughter's car disappear down the street, Helen came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "You did good," she said softly. Robert nodded, his heart full. "We raised a brave girl. We raised a loved girl," Helen corrected gently, and that made all the difference. They stood there together in the autumn morning, two people who'd built a life on love and honesty, who'd learned that the greatest gift you can give your children isn't protection from the world, but the courage to face it honestly, knowing they're loved no matter what. And in that moment, Robert understood something he'd always known but never quite put into words. Love wasn't about understanding everything or even approving of every choice. Love was about seeing someone fully, accepting them completely, and standing beside them always. It was the simplest thing in the world, and the most profound. The weekend had changed everything and nothing. Sarah was still his daughter, still the little girl who'd held his hand and believed in him. And he was still her father, still the man who would love her unconditionally until his last breath and beyond. That was what family meant. That was what love meant. And that was more than enough.